Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're going to stink up the place with John Waters Polyester. And joining us for this episode is our Genre Vision sister and very good friend, Dani Ryan. Hi, Dani.
Hey, boys.
Who better to bring on this episode about a real biological woman than a real biological woman herself, Dani Ryan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're stoked to have you here, Dani. It's always fun to talk to you, and we know that you have a particular affinity for John Waters, so we're lucky to have you here as the resident John Waters expert at Genre Vision.
Thrilled to be here. Happy to talk about one that I had only seen for the first time this week. So thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's a new watch for all of us. And we previously covered Serial Mom, another John Waters film, during our Scary Parents or Scarence month. And maybe we'll continue to dig into his filmography. We'll see. But before we do that, just a couple quick calls to action. We do have a new review on the Apple Podcast Store from The Putka. They say, 5 stars, love the crazy review of Boxer's Omen, hoping you do Tokyo Gore Police. First of all, thank you so much, The Putka. I adore our episode on the Boxer's Omen. It's one of my favorite movies we've ever done for the show. I can speak for Travis. He agrees.
'Tis true.
Dani, you know what Tokyo Gore Police is.
I do. I actually own it on DVD. I love that flick, and I think it would definitely fit in with your Gonzo International stuff, for sure. It's a wild one, but it's a lot of fun.
We'll have to definitely add it to the list. So thank you so much, The Putka. These reviews help us out so much on the Apple Podcast Store. So if you dig what we're doing, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. If you leave a written review, we will feature it here on the show. Another thing we got to check in with is Patreon. We had a wonderful Patreon premium subscriber, Sam, upped their pledge. Thank you so much, Sam. That means more than we could possibly say, especially right now. Patreon.com/genrevision. Go there if you would like to get access to all the other awesome bonus stuff that we're doing, weekly pre-shows, pre-show discussions. We just did one for this one that Dani joined us on. We have some other really cool stuff that's cooking up that we're finally going to get in the can that's going to be Patreon exclusive. It's just $5 a month to become a premium subscriber to get access to everything at the Genre Vision Patreon page. So if that sounds like something that you would love to do, we'd love you to do it. Patreon.com/genrevision. Okay, Polyester. This was a first watch for all of us, which I think is very cool. I like when we all get to experience something for the first time together. And as far as John Waters goes, and we've covered him a little bit on Serial Mom, how he's this kind of outsider filmmaker who lived in the Baltimore area and had his pack of creatives that he worked with called the Dreamlanders. And Polyester is really interesting because this is pretty much John Waters' first studio film. It was with New Line Cinema. This is before New Line was anything. They had kind of made their money on doing roadshow re-releases of midnight movies like Reefer Madness. And this is before they had made Nightmare on Elm Street, which was really the movie that put them on the map. And Polyester is John Waters, I think, attempting to make his version of what he believes a studio film could be, but it's still going to be a John Waters movie.
Yeah, it's a studio film in that it's not this 16 mil super grimy, possibly black and white like his previous films. Also, he finally utilized a Steadicam, which is really nice, especially after watching Multiple Maniacs and Female Trouble right before Polyester. I was like, oh my God, Steadicam, thank God. So it's just a lot of little things.
I knew I was in for a little bit more of an expensive John Waters experience when the first shot after the Odorama explaining prologue was a helicopter shot. Like when the opening credits for the movie start in earnest, it's a helicopter shot of the suburbs. And I'm thinking, John Waters movie with a helicopter shot in it. Like, what universe have we stumbled into? But it's like, oh no, Bob Shaye actually wanted to throw some money at this. And, you know, even though Polyester may not have been like a huge box office smash, like John Waters and Bob Shaye would continue their working relationship for many years.
Yes, you mentioned Odorama, which we should pretty much set up right at the beginning, because before the movie starts proper, we get this almost kind of a Abrams Zucker beginning with a Dr. Quackenshaw.
Yep.
Who is speaking directly to the audience and talking to them about the power of the human nose and how they've developed this technology for the movie called Odorama, which was basically a scratch and sniff card with 10 little spots on it that you got when you went and saw the movie. And when the movie plays, different numbers will flash on the screen. And when they flash on the screen, you are encouraged to scratch and sniff that particular number on your Odorama card. And you will experience a smell that's going on in the movie. Now, what I like about this gimmick is that it's not just a gimmick. The idea of smell is actually a crucial plot point at times in the movie. Our lead character, Francine Fishpaw, played by the always delightful Divine, has an incredibly enhanced sense of smell. So there will be times when she is literally running around the movie trying to sniff out something. So this Odorama gag, while it's very funny, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of the moments that lead to some of the funnier smell gags in the movie, it's not totally separate from what's actually going on in the movie.
Right. I mean, it's like many other gimmick movies in that whatever the gimmick mechanic is, whether it's smell-o-vision or Odorama is in this case, or, you know, 3D or, you know, whatever sort of William Castle hokery is involved, it's like, it's not crucial to the movie working as a film, but this actually integrates its gimmick, I think, more heavily than just any number of movies that were shot in 3D, you know, 6-7 years ago in, you know, blockbuster cinema, or you know, heaven forbid, post-converted to 3D.
Well, it makes me think of, because a lot of those gimmick movies, it would just be, okay, it's in 3D, like Creature from the Black Lagoon or House of Wax. It's just in 3D. But then the movie that it made me think of was William Castle's 13 Ghosts, in which the audience was encouraged to put on these glasses that would allow them to see the ghosts in the movie.
Right.
And then later in the 13 Ghosts remake, they made that into a plot point that, oh, characters have to put on glasses in the movie to see the ghosts. It's like, oh, okay, so you're trying to integrate the gimmick into the narrative in some way other than just being a gimmick. So I appreciated that with Polyester, that it's a movie that has smells and odors built into it as part of its story and character.
Yeah, and you know, it wants you to invest in that way in Francine's experience in the movie.
Right.
In the most John Waters way possible, which is to smell all these horrible smells.
Yeah, it's deeply unpleasant. It's like the first and the last smell are both nice, and the other 8 are all awful. So it's kind of a gag all of on its own. Like, John Waters is probably just sitting there tittering because he's like, hee, I made them smell poo.
Well, and John Waters, his whole role is like, you know, MC of the freak show. Like, he knows people are going to show up to the theaters to see a gimmick. He knows people are going to show up to the theaters to see, you know, like I said, the freak show. Like, he knows people, you know, at heart are perverts, and he wants to bring them to the cinemas with, it's like, well, I can get away with farting in these people's faces, and they'll pay more for it because
because it's me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, no, it is insanely beautiful. And you know, just his role as smut capitalist is just wonderful. Waters having this sort of level of polish and ability to sort of reach a wider audience for the first time. It's an odd choice for this movie because this movie, I feel, was more impenetrable to me than even some of his, you know, earlier, like, real shock exploitation stuff. Like, this doesn't really feel like outsider art anymore. But I did feel sort of left out because before this, I had never seen what this movie was spoofing. And this movie is a spoof of a certain genre of film.
Yeah, it's specifically targeting primarily the melodramas of Douglas Sirk. More so, and you were looking into this, Travis, this kind of subgenre of what was dubbed women's films in the 50s.
Well, there's an interesting difference. These are called women's films, and then there's women's films, which were made by women. So in this instance, women's films was something that was made and financed by men who ran movie studios to sell to white suburban female audiences. And, you know, in the case of All That Heaven Allows, which is like Douglas Sirk's probably most notable melodrama from the 50s, like that was written by a woman. And I think there's one woman with a story credit on it. But, otherwise, this is sort of taking cues from Tennessee Williams melodramas in a lot of ways. It's similarly stagey, and, you know, the men are similarly sort of hunky. You know, Rock Hudson plays the lead in that movie, and everybody thinks he's this big hunk.
Like what you're saying is basically that these movies are what men think women want.
Or what they wanted to sell to women. Yeah. It was sort of like an idealized version of like, this is what we think you want.
Right.
And in some ways that's a, you know, exploitation of a market. And, you know, and that's not out of the ordinary. That sort of exploitative element for cinema is certainly not out of the ordinary. And John Waters knew that. And so that sense of exploitation, I think, works well for Waters wanting to spoof that sort of stuff. But ultimately, I didn't feel like I understood what polyester was until I watched enough of All That Heaven Allows to figure out, like, oh, Waters is sending up the idea of, like, oh, this is the kind of thing we think women want.
Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because when I was watching it, I was like, okay, it's spoofing this, and I don't really know, you know, the things it's spoofing other than it's, you know, women's films, and it's those ones made in the 50s. So I just sort of was like, okay, this is John Waters doing a Lifetime movie, and it still worked. Like, if you just sort of go 1950s Lifetime movie, it's the same sort of melodrama with women who just can't handle anything and just cry and fall down, and then they somehow manage to pull it together in the end, and you're like, how? Where was the character development?
Yeah.
Even not, because I've not seen any of Douglas Sirk's films or any of these women's films, but even not having that baseline, I got that the joke was Divine's character, Francine, is this woman who is just, everything in her life is awful. Her children, you know, she just wants to have the perfect postcard suburban life, but her daughter is, you know, incredibly sexually liberated and is hanging out with the bad boy, the punk. Her son is a foot fetishist, to put it lightly. He's not only a foot fetishist, but he's going around town and stomping on women's feet. This is being treated as kind of like, almost like he's the local serial killer. Which is so funny.
Yeah, the news segments about the Stomper are particularly funny, but like Francine's whole life revolves around this idea of her wanting to be the kind of ideal housewife. So she's stuck in sort of a, you know, a conservative model. Like, this is what she wants for herself, but she's beset on all sides from conservatives and liberals alike. Like, there are both conservative and liberal ideas that are sort of assaulting her and like oppressing her and making her life worse. And I thought, well, okay, like, at what point is this going to turn around? Because I was under a certain impression of like how the movie was going to go, but like throughout most of the movie, shit just gets worse and worse and worse for Francine. I was like, good God, what's happening?
Yeah, Francine cannot catch a break.
I mean, it is the core of what I think of when I think of melodrama, is that it just gets so absurd. Because it's interesting, when I did my research on Douglas Sirk and the movies that he made, it immediately was like, oh, I grew up with this. I just grew up with what the things that ripped this off. This is daytime soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
This is that level of emotional intensity and plot ridiculousness and everything. But it was being done in prestige movies in the 50s, and eventually it just turned into Dallas and Dynasty and As the World Turns and The Young and the Restless and all this kind of stuff.
Turns out you didn't need gorgeous Technicolor to get the basic idea across.
Right. I mean, so, you know, now you could have shitty shot on video stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, I understood Polyester was riffing on that kind of, the horrible things that can beset a woman who just wants to have a family and have, be in love and everything. But it's like, no, her husband has to be the owner of a porn theater, who says it's like an art house theater, whatever.
And he's having an affair with Mig Stoll, and she has Bo Derek braids.
Oh my God. Mink Stoll's costumes and hair in this movie is so fucking funny.
I did a legit double take when I was like, is that Mig Stoll in cornrows? Like, what?
Uh-huh.
And the great thing is that there's this, when we find out that, yes, her husband, who just, he, from the word go, he's always just demeaning Francine. He calls her fat and lazy and stupid and all these things. We find out he's having an affair with Mink Stoll. Cut to this little room where there's like swastikas and Nazi pictures up on the walls, and they're jumping around being like, look what I've got, birth control pills, and like this, like, ooh, the sexual scandalousness of having a prophylactic.
Yeah, it's caught in this 50s ideal of chastity and purity and birth control being seen as this liberating thing that allows people to have sex for pleasure. Heaven forbid people fuck for enjoyment.
Gasp.
And so that's what Francine eventually gets to have. But, all of this is revealed to be sort of more piling on in the melodrama. So the first big thing that breaks is that, the husband is having an affair with Mink Stoll. He moves out to go live with her. And so she's stuck alone in the house with these two kids who both hate her, and they're both just terrible and awful. The daughter can't stop dancing. She's clearly like this slut caricature, I guess.
Yes.
Just super oversexed, yeah.
Just hanging out with all the worst boys, like gets picked up by a date, for a date by one of the nerdy, like, good boys. And then just a few steps out the doorway, she abandons him for Bobo Belsinger, who is the town just awful punk ass bully.
He's the Henry Bowers of this place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who we see this montage of him, bashing minorities.
So funny.
Every time I saw him, I thought of Roger from Doug, the green guy with the orange hair.
Oh my God, it's perfect. It's exactly who he is. So we got to talk about this minority bashing sequence, because I said it's funny and that will get me in trouble until I add the layers of context on top of it.
This was actually my favorite sequence in the film because of how it ends.
They're driving along, you're like, oh, they're doing like a, leaning out the car window and hitting mailboxes. But instead, the first time, it's a stereotypical, like, rabbi.
It's like a Hasidic Jewish guy.
Yeah, so they hit him, and he's like, I'm a sugar nut. Like, it's just like, oh, that's why I say it's like, this is the closest that I've seen with a Waters movie to being like a Zucker Abrams Zucker spoof.
Right.
Where it's like he hits that person, then the next person they drive by is an Asian woman, and they hit her, and then the next person they hit is this large black woman who's wearing like
it's a choir robe. She's still got her choir robes on.
Yeah.
And it was that sense of like, am I watching Kentucky Fried Movie? Like, what the fuck is this?
and then after they hit the black woman, there's this bus that gets stopped, and the black woman runs up, and the bus pulls out in front of this of the car and stops them, and all these different types of minorities get out of the bus and start attacking them, and the black woman runs up and bites the tires of the car and pops them. I guffawed.
It was a big laugh, and for me it was one of the bigger laughs in the movie, because throughout the rest of the movie it reaches such levels of, this is kind of a loaded word, but like shrill melodrama.
No, I'd agree.
You all kind of know like where I tend to draw the line with like movies that are like a consistent loud level of volume. Like even I would call Reservoir Dogs shrill, because it's all just men yelling and men yelling and men yelling and men yelling, and there's like no dynamic contrast there. It's all just like one sustained pitch. And I felt like Polyester was similar, and that's just a personal pet peeve of mine. It's not necessarily a negative about the film, because some people aren't even going to notice that. But the amping up and the piling on of melodrama upon melodrama eventually gets to the point where it's like, well, there's no way that I can take this seriously. Like, no matter how bad I feel for Francine, because I do want to sympathize with Francine. She's not just a parody of a woman.
There was one point during the movie, we were watching it together, and you sent me a message. You were like, I hope a meteor just wipes out all these assholes in her life.
Yeah. I felt awful for her.
Every bad thing that happens to everybody around Francine, eventually, you're just like, yes. Like, you do get some satisfaction there.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, when we get there, it's delightful. I've not seen a ton of Divine's performances, but of the ones I've seen, I think Francine Fishpaw is my favorite, because you could literally at any moment in the movie, it's like, do you want a good laugh or do you want to sell a moment? Cut to a Divine reaction shot. She gives the absolute best face in this movie.
She does.
And what's great is, even though she is playing it for laughs and is in tone with the spoof nature of the melodrama, she's not winking at it. She's playing it with total sincerity.
Yeah, you really feel bad for her. You really care about her. And that's so different from the other Divine roles, because everything in the previous films is she's sort of this, just destructive force. She's this filthy, awful thing. I mean, especially in like Multiple Maniacs, where she's just like...
Or Pink Flamingos, yeah.
Yeah, she's just this horrible, horrible Ursula from Little Mermaid kind of person.
I got the sense that, like, watching the older stuff, that Divine was like the main freak of the freak show. Like, people would show up to see them, and like Divine's role was sort of as provocateur. Mm-hmm. Whereas in this, Divine is not in the most provocative role. Like, it's certainly provocative by like normal people standards, but for John Waters standards, like, this is a really tame role for Divine. And, while it's certainly parody, I think I was able to invest enough in it sincerely that, I felt genuinely bad for Francine. And I wanted things to go, better for her, because holy shit, do they get bad.
Yeah, they do.
So after her husband leaves, we then fall into Francine's bout with alcoholism. And this sequence where she is wandering around inside her house, basically trying to drink everything she can find. There's this big, long single take with a really wide angle lens that is so fun and frankly horrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
Divine, like, traipsing down the stairs and drinking the 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. It's like, Bob Shaye's getting that Pepsi money, but
get it.
It's equal parts funny and horrifying and sad. Like, Waters finds such a specific tone that works in barely anything else in cinema, and somehow manages to make it work for him.
I would agree with that, because even stuff that's like really, really funny and like Serial Mom, or even A Dirty Shame, which is just filthy, there's still kind of a sadness to it that like these people are considered freaks and that they should be loved more. Like, I think John Waters' love for his characters is the most important part of it all, because it never comes across like a trauma movie. You never feel like you're laughing at them as hard. Like, it doesn't feel punching down.
Yeah, I know John Waters has spoken about this before, and maybe I said it in the Serial Mom episode, but he said every movie that he did was a spoof or a parody of a particular type of movie that he loved. He was like, I never made fun or did spoofs of things I didn't like. And I think that speaks to the heart of John Waters, because even though he is this, grandfather of filth now, there is earnestness in his characters, in his world, and in his particular worldview. Even though he will be mean to his characters, like he is excruciatingly mean to Francine in this, it's not on a macro level at her expense. It's not making fun of her. It does all this horrible stuff because it says, we want you to sympathize 100% with Francine. Like, we want you.
Right.
And I think that heart and that love is what has separated John Waters from so many other provocateur filmmakers. A lot of provocateur filmmakers are coming from a place of cynicism. There's no real cynicism in John Waters.
And that's one of the things I think he was sending up about women's films. is that, those were products designed to cater to a certain market, but they were designed largely by men in the studio system. So in this, he really didn't have a particular audience in mind other than like, who are the people who are going to show up for Odorama? And so even though it's really easy to sympathize with Francine and her sort of downward spiral, it still works on the level of like, yes, we are spoofing this kind of, what was considered a serious melodrama by putting Divine in the lead role. Like, yes, that is in some essence provocative and funny, but to actually have it work in earnest, I feel like is kind of a magic trick.
Yeah. It is. It's really surprising. I was not expecting to care about the main character as much about Divine's character, especially after coming off of, watching his older stuff and just being like, Divine, you scary. Like, she's in my nightmares right now, dude. You don't even know. Her and the lobster. But
those brows.
The brows. Ooh.
So the avalanche of melodrama that actually pours down upon Francine is partially held back by this the only other decent person in her life is this woman named Cuddles. Cuddles is unmarried. Her chauffeur named Heinz drives her around everywhere. I don't think they discuss where her money comes from. I can't remember if they
say something. It's some kind of inheritance.
Okay. But, Cuddles is played by Edith Massey.
She's so good.
I mean, this is another one of the typical Waters players. But I mean, just to have this particular character be played by Edith Massey was a wonderful choice. Because if you've never seen Edith Massey's grill, she's got a fucked up grill. And it's hard to believe like, oh, this is a wealthy heiress. But
that's certainly, again, like you're saying, the casting of Divine in the role of Francine. It's the same thing with casting Edith Massey as this person. And I think that once again speaks to the spirit of John Waters. He's like, okay, I've got my big studio movie. I've got the most money I've ever gotten to work with. These women who have been my, my absolute rocks in my performances, I'm going to give them the chance to be the starlets they could never be in a traditional system.
This is the only time, you're going to see Edith Massey in a movie as a wealthy socialite.
Right. Or Divine as a housewife.
And Divine being the one that we're sympathizing with and wanting for her to find true love and to be happy, all these things. It's like, this is radical for 1981. And I mean, maybe nowadays it may not seem like that, but when Edith Massey comes strolling in and all of her costumes are a joy, where she is like in a, what is it? Like the horse polo, like riding gear at one point, which is
sure.
So
yeah.
great. And she's got the little whip.
She's carrying around her riding crop and her polo helmet. Yeah, it's so funny. And what I love about Waters is he has this really uncanny ability to take professional actors and cast them in his films and then to kind of break down what it is that they do about typical performances and kind of abandon it so that they all come off as amateurs and non-actors. It's so funny how he's able to sort of get past what is considered like an acceptable level of artifice in acting and embrace full artifice and sort of generate this new reality in his movies where everybody's playing by different rules. I totally forgot about Hairspray. Divine is also a suburban mom in that, but that's not till 7 years after this.
Yeah, that's a little ways later, and that's a completely different kind of story too. Like Hairspray is family friendly, and this is not.
Well, I mean, Hairspray is, I think, pretty clearly his riff on Grease.
Yeah,
but Polyester is still allowed to be incredibly vulgar. Talking about the odorama, I like. Obviously, it's like, yeah, you're gonna end up smelling skunk. So like, Divine and Edith Massey will go have a picnic, and then they're like, "What's that? Oh, it's a skunk."
Natural ass.
yeah, natural ass. One of my favorite gags is a gag in the movie in which a character is putting a rose up to Divine's face, like, "Oh, here's something sweet for you to smell," tricking the audience into thinking like, "Okay, maybe I get to smell a rose." And then in the movie they switch it up and then it's immediately some smelly shoes and that's what's on the card. Like, I love that kind of good-hearted pranksterism.
I was gonna say, see, the one to me that's the funniest is a character commits suicide by putting their head in an oven, and then they ask you to smell natural gas. Like, that is so John Waters.
That's twisted.
Like, that is so twisted, but it's so funny.
We were talking in the pre-show about a similar prank pulled in, what was it, Metal Gear Solid 5, where you have the ability to create this character, this custom character head, and then they never let you use it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of pranksterism, that sort of sense of, like, I can be a trickster god here and you all will pay for it. Like, John Waters has made his career doing that sort of stuff, where he's like, I can be vulgar and horrible and you all are paying to watch me do it. And he contrasts this against people that, clutch their pearls, and think what he's doing is awful, but he knows that audiences will show up for this stuff. Whether or not audiences would show up for Polyester is, I think, a different thing entirely, because this isn't an exploitation film. It certainly comes off as like Waters for sure. Like, this is not outside of his sort of normal wheelhouse. It's definitely not family friendly, but whether or not people will actually appreciate what he's doing is, I think, with Polyester a little more difficult, because like, I can tell you, when I watched this, I didn't fully appreciate what was going on until I started to do the academic kind of research that was necessary for me to go, oh, okay, he's spoofing this thing that's kind of like a trend that's died off, basically, or just doesn't exist in the form that it did. I'm going to talk about the nature of that kind of spoofery later, but it's not like women's films reach the level of like pop culture ubiquity that we're all going to understand that specific reference when watching Polyester. Like, for me, it just didn't work without having seen a Douglas Sirk film.
It didn't work as well for me either. I think in part because I had just watched, the older films, and they're so gonzo and so ridiculous and so just they're not really spoofing anything directly, because I think Waters was just kind of figuring things out and experimenting. And so to go into something that's a little bit more thinky, which is weird with a Waters movie, that you got to think about it and be academic. But I would agree, like, this is one I think I'm going to enjoy more on rewatches, because I'll actually catch things and I'll actually be like, oh, I get the joke now.
I guess I, in that regard, enjoyed it the most. I mean, having not been familiar with, having a very, very, very cursory understanding of what the Douglas Sirk melodramas and that were, I still really enjoyed it, because at the end of the day, John Waters just knows how to write funny stuff. There are gold lines in this movie that just cracked me up. Pretty much anything having to do with the son and daughter. There's a part where the daughter has sex and she gets pregnant, and she comes back and she's like, I'm going to have an abortion and I can't wait. Like, she's so excited.
That was funny. And then it's also, I thought it was hilarious when you see the daughter show up later. And then for some reason, the daughter, who is normally dressed in a very provocative, sexy dress, she's dressed very conservatively. And I'm like, what's going on here? And then she tells, oh, I'm off to get my abortion. She dressed up to go get her abortion, which is one of the funnier things in the movie to me. It's just such a crass joke. And then something we haven't talked about at all that I thought was going to be a more important part of the film was Tab Hunter's character.
Yeah. He doesn't really show up until like the last 20 minutes.
Well, he's seeded throughout the movie. He is clearly supposed to be the hunky dreamboat guy that's going to take Francine away from all this horribleness. It's going to be the paperback romance guy that takes her away.
Which is kind of what I wanted. Like, all of the art that I had seen, like all the promotional art that I'd seen from the film, and I really didn't have any other knowledge of the film, was like this sort of paperback romance cover, where I was like, oh, this is John Waters' attempt at, telling a tawdry paperback romance. And that's not what this movie is.
No.
Nope. Well, because she keeps seeing Tab Hunter as they drive through Baltimore, and he'll be in his swanky Corvette and give her a couple looks. But then when they finally stop and talk to each other, it's at the scene of a car accident.
With the severed head on the ground.
And they're just like, This is their meet cute.
Isn't there just like a sheet over the head too? But it is very clear it's just a severed head.
Yeah, but doesn't the guy get it tossed? The cop like tosses the head.
Yeah, the EMT, the ambulance driver, can't figure out what to do with the head, so he just chucks it in the woods. This is sort of on Francine's upswing. I think before she gets in with Tab Hunter's character, the sort of hunky man who she's been seeing around, her kids come back to her, and they've both been sort of reformed as these, suburban ideals. Like, oh, they've figured out how to channel all of their anxieties into art. Like her son, who was the serial foot stomper, has now started painting like pop art of women's heels. And so he's channeled all of his energy into that, and he's fixed now. And then her daughter has learned how to macrame, and then she starts dressing like a hippie. But her kids are home, her kids are loving, and to Francine's eyes now appear normal. But really it's just more expression of her conservative fantasy.
It is, but I mean, like you said, things are on the upswing. Her kids have channeled their seemingly reckless abandon into artistic pursuits. Francine is apparently getting over her alcoholism. She goes to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, which is a great spoof where just instead of, the usual like, hi Francine, and everybody's just berating and awful, like, get up there, go now. It's just so awesome. I love that so much.
Well, the scene where Cuddles takes Francine dress shopping and Francine has to puke into her own handbag is like, oh, come on.
It's not great. That's
but so another one of my favorite lines is that Francine's talking to Dexter, her son, about, trying to kick the alcohol, and really just wonderfully plainly Dexter's like, come on, Mom, I got off the angel dust.
Now I just paint shoes.
It's so beautiful. But then, yeah, she starts this fling with Tab Hunter, which you're like, oh, okay, this is where this is going to go. He's going to take her away from all this. They drive by her husband Elmer and Mig Stoll, and like their car's broken down, and they have a flat tire, and so they get to laugh at them. It's like, oh yeah, here's the big wish fulfillment. They get to run around in fields in slow motion while apparently Bill Murray sings a romance song.
I loved that montage. It was so funny. I was watching the movie with subtitles on, and of course the name of the song pops up in the captions, and it says Bill Murray singing blank. And you and I were watching it together, synchronized, Drew, and I said, "This is Bill Murray singing," and you went, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's not a joke."
So then, this is all in the upswing, but then we start to see it's like, okay, what's going on with Tab Hunter's character, who, by the way, is named Todd Tomorrow, which, just a beautiful.
Waters is one of the best at naming characters and places.
It's true.
Oh, well, and he uses alliteration so much. Like, he's so great about giving characters names that have the same letter for the first and last name, and it's really fun.
Francine Fishpaw, Todd Tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, the romance is apparently in full swing. One of the best lines of the movie happens when Tab Hunter tells Divine, "Let me kiss away your DTs, honey."
I just like how he wakes her up the next morning. He just keeps elbowing her. Francine.
Well, that's kind of the first hint that we're like, maybe this guy isn't all what he seems, because he's being kind of
a dick,
rough about it. But then it turns out that he's the owner of a drive-in theater. This gag destroyed me, because this is, again, another kind of Zucker Abrams Zucker type deal. They go to the drive-in, and it's this really classy place where the advertisements beforehand are like, stop by our snack bar to get foie gras and caviar and stuff. And then they cut to this big, some dinner hall place that's supposed to be the lobby of the drive-in theater, and it's, this opulent reception.
Champagne drive-in, yeah. It's another really strange idea that is very signature Waters, but we soon find out that, the introduction of this new man into her life was engineered by Francine's awful mother, who, just like, her ex-husband Elmer, is trying to destroy her life. Like, everybody's just trying to tear Francine down, except for her two reformed artist children now, and Cuddles, who has kind of vanished from the film at this point, but we'll soon see her again. We find out that Tab Hunter's character, Todd Tomorrow, is in league with Francine's awful mother when he goes into a private room at his a private room at a restaurant, which I think is the concession stand, quote unquote, for the drive-in theater.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And her mother is in there, and they start freebasing cocaine.
There's just like a mountain of cocaine in front of them. They're like, and Tab's like, Todd Tomorrow's like, all right, at first I got to blast off.
And then when Francine discovers them, she's just like, you? And I was like, oh, this is good. The mom's a great villain.
Oh, there's a great point where she's feeding into Francine's alcoholism, because during that whole sequence where Francine is just, stumbling around the house trying to find anything she can to drink, her mother shows up and she's like, oh, here, do you want a little drink? And so Francine grabs it and drinks it and spits it out. And on the odorama number comes up. So you scratch sniff it and it's gasoline. And then her mom says, you'd even drink gasoline. It's so awful.
One of my favorite sequences in the movie is where we think Francine's mom might be actually taken out of the picture. It's Halloween and two trick-or-treaters show up to Francine's house, and Francine's mom is there. Turns out it's Bobo Belsinger is one of the trick-or-treaters. They rush into the house. They get into a firefight with her mom. Like they're just shooting at one another. It's again beyond bizarre, but that's Waters' sense of camp. And I think camp and melodrama are so tightly woven together. It's kind of like horror and comedy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's two tastes that could potentially taste good together. The taste of this movie, though, is so funky and so particular that I think it's a pretty bracing first watch, probably for just about anybody, unless you're really well versed in Waters and in, the kind of movies that it's spoofing.
Yeah, it's like a stinky cheese. You got to work your way up to it.
An acquired taste.
Yeah, an acquired taste. That's good.
There's still more, because at the end, when it's revealed that, yes, Todd Tomorrow is in league with her mother, and they're just, basically pointing and laughing at Francine. And at this point, she's having a full-on mental breakdown where she's snorting like a warthog, and Todd Tomorrow and Francine's mother just sit on her back like she's a bench. And are making fun of her and saying, how they're going to tear her down and everything. At the same time, Elmer Fishpaw and Mink Stole are showing up. This is when everybody's coming together, and the kids end up having to defend their mom, because it looks like Elmer's here to potentially kill Francine. And one of my favorite lines is the daughter strangles, I believe it's Mink Stole, and she goes, I never wanted to use macrame to kill. So when this whole end sequence is going on, it's such a ramp up of, okay, now they're going to try and frame Francine for the murders of her husband and Mink Stole, and then they're going to somehow make away with the money, like money from I don't know, Elmer's husband's friend. I don't know exactly why they're doing this all to Francine. There's some kind of implication about money, but I can't remember specifically what it was.
I think it's a life insurance scam. That sounds right.
It could be. I can tell you right now that element of why this is all happening to Francine wasn't important.
No.
Because Francine's bewilderment at her own situation was, I think, more important than the why or any sort of plot mechanic. It's just a matter of I can't comprehend why these people are doing this to me. Who could be so horrible as to do this to me? Francine's constantly being victimized by these other people was the predominant force of the film.
Well, and I think, again, talking about being in that perspective of Francine's perspective being so important to us sympathizing with her, some things that we didn't mention that we should is we get to see a Francine dream sequence in which she dreams that, because earlier her husband Elmer, when they first separate, is harassing her by having all these pizzas delivered to her.
Yeah, he pizza bombs her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he pizza bombs her, and then she ends up having a dream in her kind of... This is like her somewhere that's green moment from Little Shop of Horrors, where she's like, oh, I'm in my kitchen and it's beautiful, and then this fog comes in from the kitchen window and it opens up, and there's this angelic pizza boy wearing nothing but like a jock strap.
I love the dream sequence. It's one of the most beautiful sequences in the movie, but it's a pretty good looking movie all the way through, even for such a consciously sort of scuzzy, grimy experience. But like he does his best to sort of imitate the Cirque style. There's lots of blue and purple lighting, so it's not an ugly movie at all. It's pretty good looking.
Well, and he lights all the female characters' eyes the way that Cirque used to light the rectangle of light just over their eye line.
Yeah.
But so back to this, I just remember the dream sequence. I was like, we have to mention that because it's great. But during this end sequence, finally, Cuddles shows back up with Heinz, her driver, who previously Francine and Todd had gone to Cuddles' debutante ball, where Edith Massey gets to come out in this delightful, beautiful gown and dance with Heinz. And it's like, why shouldn't this woman feel like a queen for a day? Like, come on. Because, again, in a traditional film roles or traditional societal roles, Edith Massey could never be that person. But here, John Waters is like, fuck you. I'm going to put her in this giant, gorgeous, diamond-studded gown and let her be the belle of the ball. And it's like, fuck, how can you not love this guy?
And then she gets married at the end, and it's like a dream wedding.
Yeah. I mean, this is like the most direct spoof element from All That Heaven Allows. All That Heaven Allows is about a widow marrying, Rock Hudson's character, like falling in love with Rock Hudson's character. And he's an arborist, basically, the gardener. And everybody sort of looks down on her because Rock Hudson's character is younger and he's not part of the whole suburban model. He's not a respectable man. He's young and he's hunky, but, he gets dirt on his hands for work. It's like all scandal. But I love this romance that they draw between Cuddles and Heinz, who works for her. I just love the guy, and thank God he runs over everybody.
Yes, and in the end, they're coming to Francine's house, and he ends up just running over Tab Hunter, who we should say, Tab Hunter's casting alone is a great kind of in-joke to Rock Hudson.
Sure.
Being that Rock Hudson was this huge hunky guy, but was secretly gay, and Tab Hunter, it was a similar thing where it's like, yeah, he's this hunky star guy, but there's rumors that he's gay. And I believe by 1981 he was out.
Yes.
Yeah. So there is kind of a winking nod to, it's like, well, let's get this gay hunky actor from a certain era to kind of riff on this Rock Hudson ideal. The layers, this is where Waters took this stuff seriously and knew his shit. Like, he's not just doing this on a lark. Like, he's clearly a fan of this stuff on so many levels, to the point that even casting Tab Hunter is in of itself another part of the joke and the spoof.
Yeah, there's a lot of meta spoof with Waters. I mean, down to having Patty Hearst star as somebody who gets kidnapped and gets Stockholm Syndrome and Cecil B. Demented. Like, that's right. Just kind of his whole thing.
Yeah, I can see Waters appreciating women's films on a whole bunch of levels, because I think there is a tendency, and this isn't like a super hot take, among certain gay men to appropriate certain things that are directed at women, whether it be makeup or, dresses or, things that sort of emphasize that hyper femininity thing, and to sort of fetishize that. That, I think, is why drag is one of the big reasons why drag has come about and is still so popular. It's more popular than it's ever been. I think the hyper femininity on a surface level of women's films is attractive for non-ironic reasons, but also for camp value. And Waters, I think, was probably the best person to create an ode to that genre of film by both sending it up and pointing arrows at what he thinks are like the best parts of it.
I created an ode and created an odor.
Well played.
Very true. A whole card full of them.
You kept saying, Travis, not having the background seemed to be a deal. It wasn't for me. I really enjoyed Polyester as this kind of Zucker Abrams Zucker riff on histrionic drama in terms of, oh, let's just keep taking this thing to the nth degree eventually, you know, and having those particular John Waters flavors or smells rather to give it a punctuation of individuality. I stand by. I really think it's my favorite performance from Divine. It's so earnest and delightful and so funny. And again, just cut to a freaking reaction shot of her. And this is in a movie where they cut to a reaction shot of a dog and it's gold.
This is true.
Yeah.
So like, it is a really beautiful looking movie. The new restoration on it has done it a lot of favors. I think maybe, like you are saying, though, if you have that background, it will enhance the viewing of Polyester. But for me, not having that background, I still had a really fun time. It's a completely effective comedy, which is what it's attempting to be. It shows that John Waters is a filmmaker and not just a shock provocateur. He has real filmmaking chops.
Right. He's not just like an outsider artist who approaches things in the amateur sense or doesn't really have the understanding of the medium. Like, no, he clearly has a deep understanding of the medium in an academic sense, too.
Mm-hmm. So I think in a lot of ways, this has got to be up there in terms of, I don't know, being accessible enough as a John Waters film, but still being an outright, you know, piece of filth, which is what he's known for. You know, something like Hairspray, where it's like, that's his attempt at making a family movie. That obviously is going to be much more accessible, but it's also, it can't be as full on John Waters as something like Polyester is.
Right. Now, luckily, All That Heaven Allows, the Douglas Sirk film that this pulls so much from, and Polyester are both part of the Criterion Collection. They've both been beautifully restored on Blu-ray. And if you owned both of those Blu-rays, you would put those on your shelf. On Genre Vision, we go to the shelf to pull off recommendations or even substitutions sometimes for the films we talk about. Danielle, what are you pulling off the shelf today to recommend to pair with Polyester?
So I wanted to think of something that dug into the whole 50s housewife thing and had that same sort of like camp, like Polyester and John Waters films set in the 50s in particular have a very, very distinct feel to them. And it's interesting because there's one movie that popped immediately into my head, and that is Edward Scissorhands.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a perfect suburbia movie.
Yeah, I feel like that's a suburbia movie. It's also a movie about weirdos. It's also kind of sad. It's also really weird in some places. And I think it would be an interesting pairing, you know, because in Polyester, it's Francine's story, but in Edward Scissorhands, the housewives are kind of the villains. So it's the other end of it, which I think is interesting.
I feel like Waters and Burton used to be cousins.
Yep.
And they've since grown to be more distant cousins.
It's unfortunate because, yeah, I do. I feel like some of their early stuff, like especially like Crybaby, like if you put Crybaby and Edward Scissorhands next to each other, good God.
That's a double feature for you right there. Drew, what are you pulling off the shelf today?
Well, I decided on another movie about a demented family that has some real issues going on, and is also directed by a man with the last name of Waters. This is The House of Yes. This is based on a play by Wendy MacLeod. It was adapted by Mark Waters and directed by Mark Waters. Extremely small cast. Parker Posey, Tori Spelling, Freddie Prinze Jr. The gist is that Parker Posey plays this young woman who has only ever, I believe, lived at her kind of very rich mansion, and it's a family with a lot of money, and she believes that she is Jackie Kennedy, and she reunites with her brother who comes over, and it is implied that basically her brother is the only person who ever really understood her. They would play play act as kids, as her as Jackie O and him as John JFK.
You.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, well, it goes places.
Flowers in the attic. All right.
But the conflict is that she's not seen him in a long time. He shows up, and it turns out that he has brought his fiancée with him. And this kind of trips a wire in her. I think it's one of the essential Parker Posey performances. She's incredible in this. It's an extremely small cast. It's dark. It's very, very dark, but it's also comedic. It also might be the greatest performance ever given by Freddie Prinze Jr.
No shit.
Yes, because he is playing the lunkiest of lunkheads, and he's amazing at it.
I'll have to see this. Evidently, this was a big hit at Sundance in 1997, so I didn't know.
All right. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no, I thought you had seen it, Dani, but okay, I'm House of Yes. It ain't for everybody. It's weird and it's dark, but man, it's a good one. But Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf?
With regards to spoofs and sort of having prior knowledge of what it is that was spoofing in order for it to work, I was trying to think about spoofs in, big hit spoofs at the movies that were sort of outside of the Zucker model. And the first one that came to mind was Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, where you had a spoof that was so strong and so potent and hit so big at the box office that it damn near killed the spy genre.
Yeah.
The spy genre is now so lost down a hole of seriousness that I wonder if it will ever get to a place where we'll be able to appreciate it. Because even the Bond films are now trying again to be more fun and to incorporate more elements that Austin Powers spoofed directly, but haven't been successful in incorporating them into the fabric of spy fiction again. The only two Bond movies that have worked since Austin Powers have been Casino Royale and Skyfall.
Mm-hmm.
Which are all extremely straight-faced and did their best to strip themselves down of everything that kind of Austin Powers poked fun at. I mean, when you say spy fiction, I think more specifically it is the James Bond franchise, because there's been stuff like, I would say, the Mission Impossible franchise has more and more embraced its bigger, cartoonier elements.
Those still seem really self-serious to me. Like,
okay,
They are.
I have no interest.
yeah. Well, especially the most recent ones, when they get really wrapped up in their own continuity. It's like, oh yeah, they're taking their canon seriously now, so there's a level of seriousness that comes across. But like the Brad Bird one,
That one's fun. And then 5 also has, I think, some really good jokes at Cruise's expense, which is one of the reasons I loved that movie so much. And then 6 is just damn fine cinema. It's like relentless action, incredible stunt work, just damn fine filmmaking all around. But Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is probably the single best spy film that has come out since Austin Powers, but it's such an alien thing when you compare it to like what a spy movie romp used to be.
sure.
Or like The Bourne Identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Bourne movies changed the game in a big way.
Yeah, and not in a good one.
Nope.
Oh boy. Anyway, yeah, that's what I pulled off the shelf. Let's take a look at what the listeners were pulling off the shelf for last week's episode. We did about, God, what the hell did we talk about? Some sort of, I don't know, something.
We did Jupiter Ascending versus Valerian, and we had a good number of shelf picks. Thank you, everybody. Mr. Milksteak and Eric Fuchs both went with David Lynch's Dune. Mm-hmm. Good shelf pick, and come back in June because we're doing Dune. Loyal listener JT had a couple recommendations. He said, I mean, The Fifth Element is a given, so how about an oft-delayed and ultimately unsuccessful space story, Supernova, or for a more kid-friendly spin, Zathura? I saw Supernova. I rented it, but I remember next to nothing about it. I did read about it in the David Hughes book, The Greatest Sci-Fi Movies Never Made, because the story behind that movie, I'm certain, is more fascinating than the finished product. And Zathura is great.
Isn't that Jumanji in space?
Pretty much.
Yeah, it's from the same author who wrote the book Jumanji. That's directed by Jon Favreau. It's so much better than Jumanji. I mean, like my nostalgia brain is like, yes, I'll always love Jumanji more, but Zathura is by far a way better film.
I've never seen it.
It's good. It's the exact same thing as Jumanji. Like, okay, this board game comes to life, but instead it's kind of 50s atomic sci-fi ideas of robots and stuff. There's a plot point that is insane that it's in a kid's movie. It's very disturbing. But
okay, I'm gonna have to see this.
But it incredibly funny. And yeah, like I said, Supernova, maybe one day we'll do that for the show. I don't know.
I think we should. We'll do the R-rated cut.
Okay, sounds good. Steven Nesbella had for Valerian, Avatar, a great movie to look at visually that ultimately I didn't need to see again. And for Jupiter, Matrix Revolutions, great ideas that end up falling flat. I mostly agree with those. I don't ever need to see Avatar again.
It's Pocahontas with blue people.
Word.
And then Matrix Revolutions, I admire that movie more than I actively enjoy it.
It's ambitious.
That's one way to put it. That was one of those, like, your voice got higher as you. It's ambitious.
I mean, I think it's pretty. It's a very ambitious film.
It tried.
It's a movie.
It's a movie. Yeah, exactly. It's a movie.
Can't argue that.
It's got the Merovingian, so it could be worse.
It does. It does have the Merovingian. Well, let's do some currently consuming.
Num 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 num.
Danny, what's been on your plate?
So, like pretty much anybody who owns a Nintendo Switch, I have been playing Animal Crossing, New Horizons, which is the latest game, and you get to have your own desert island and build it from scratch, which is pretty fun. The other Animal Crossing games, you always build like a town or you build a campsite in the Pocket version. But this one, you get a whole island and it's kind of fun. It's really relaxing. You just kind of wander around, chop trees, catch bugs, catch fish, and build your island. And I'm really enjoying it. There was a small period there where there was a creepy bunny on my island. Not a fan. Anybody who's played knows what I'm talking about. That bunny is evil. But it's a lot of fun, and I recommend it for anybody who likes sort of, laid back, sort of just fun little farming, crafting games. And the interactive element's pretty cool because I've gotten to play with some friends from Twitter, and some of, like, my brother's come to my island a couple of times where we've traded fruits and things like that. And I know Elijah Wood's out there going to people's islands, so that's pretty neat.
Now, I've heard a little bit of criticism, particularly about the whole travel element, and that it involves a lot of weird, unnecessary steps between you leaving your island and getting to someone else's. Mm-hmm. Can you attest to that, or is that, like, not a thing?
It can be a pain. Like, if anybody has their little phone open in the game, then you can't go to their island while the phone's open. So if there's like 3 or 4 people chilling on an island and one of them opens their phone while you're traveling, it kicks you back out.
Weird.
So there's definitely some kinks that they need to work out. I feel like a lot of it's just because they didn't quite figure out the technology and how to get everybody on each other's islands without overlap. But I hope that that's something they'll fix in future patches. And it's not terrible. I mean, if you're going to somebody where you know them, like, you can just send them a text message and be like, stay off your stinking phone for 5 minutes. But if it's like, somebody on Twitter or whatever, it's like, hey, here's my dodo code, then you might have to try for 20 minutes to get over there.
I feel like that's always been, if the Switch has one weak point, it's the fact that the sort of internet connectivity elements between users are kind of hard to work around.
It's a Nintendo thing. Like, Nintendo has not had a good online component ever.
And they seem really stubborn about sticking to their guns. And I don't know why. I mean, both the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live work just fine. Steam works great. Mm-hmm. I don't know why they're still so stuck in this model of making everything so convoluted, with friend codes and all this sort of stuff. It's like, trying to send message via tin can and string. That's one of the reasons I haven't bought a Switch, aside from financial reasons. Like, I would love to play Breath of the Wild, but just haven't gotten there yet. And I would love to play Animal Crossing New Horizons. It sounds like a lot of fun.
It is. It's a lot of fun. I mean, yeah, you're in debt to a raccoon forever, but there's worse things.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds better than what we got right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's a raccoon. Just all the little animal people that live in the islands are a lot of fun. Like, they're actually pretty well written, other than the owl who never shuts up.
That bastard. Anyway, I've been playing a video game as well. The game I've been playing was on PS4. It's called Death Stranding, and it is the latest game from Hideo Kojima. And everybody who says this game is weird is absolutely right, yet they can't really capture just how weird the game actually is. The story is nonsensical to the point of just embracing the fact that it's nonsensical. It's not worth trying to figure out what's actually going on.
Yeah, that sounds like a
just
Kojima
about
game.
It's just about accepting every moment at face value.
Babies
and
in backpacks.
Pretty much. I have never owned a Metal Gear Solid, like what people would think of as a Kojima game. I've never owned one. Like when the Metal Gear Solid games were really, really popular, I wasn't into stealth games. So I kind of missed the boat on that stuff. Maybe one of these days I'll play them, but the more I heard about just like how many cutscenes they forced you to watch in the later Metal Gear Solid games, I was like, nah, this doesn't quite sound like what I'm into. And yes, there are many, many cutscenes in Death Stranding. Most of them are skippable, and I do skip them after watching them for the first couple times. It's like, okay, yeah, I don't need to watch Norman Reedus take a shower for 2.5 minutes.
I do.
It gets old.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Okay. But then, he goes and poops. And then while he's pooping, the toilet cubicle puts up a holographic ad for Norman Reedus' show on AMC, his motorcycle show. The game is beyond absurd, but the core gameplay mechanic, which is basically just being a delivery person, is, from my perspective, done in a pretty interesting way. It's a game about terrain traversal. It's a walking simulator.
Yeah.
It's totally a walking sim. But the driving also feels pretty good too. Like once you gain access to vehicles, then tearing across the sort of open terrain in your electric motorcycle is like, yeah, this feels good. I like this.
I admire Kojima as somebody who has always marched to the beat of his own drum in narrative and design and engine. He was adamant about building an entire new engine for these games, for starting with, I believe, Metal Gear Solid 5. And that's exciting. Like, that really excites me. It's like, okay, he is trying to innovate and do different things. And as far as the science fiction elements of his worlds, I adore them. Everything like science fiction-y I see about Death Stranding hooks me. But then I look at the actual gameplay for the majority, and I'm like, I don't know. Because when it comes to walking simulators, I have to really be intrigued by the world I'm walking through.
I think it's pretty intriguing, but also knowing what I know about you and what happened with open world games, it's like, yeah, I don't think Drew would be into the core mechanics.
Maybe I that's my worry, and I'm like, I don't think I will. No, I haven't rolled the dice on it because I'm like, I think I would either just get bored or there wouldn't be, because like the delivery mechanic, like you have to deliver this thing to the spot. It's like, great, that's linear enough for me that within the boundaries of that I can explore and do what I want and have different encounters and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know if the world would necessarily be interesting enough. Like the BioShock games, I love the BioShock games, but the actual action elements of them are the things I like the least. I just like being in those worlds and walking around and looking at every single, poster that's on a wall that builds out the politics and social makeup of these worlds. And there's an element to that, to Death Stranding, where I'm like, that could fascinate me. Maybe that would be enough to keep me entranced. But when I look at, because I have not sat down and watched like a ton of gameplay from it, but the snippets that I've seen of like, all right, now you got to like get this ladder out and cross this ravine and stuff. I'm like, no, like that doesn't intrigue me at all.
Yeah. I don't think the game is one particularly for you, but I'm enjoying my experience with it so far.
Good.
I do like the sort of walking sim aspect to it. I can't go to any public parks recently, but this does give me the feeling of like, oh, this is a crucial wilderness experience that I'm missing from my life. I'm getting enough of a taste of it here.
Okay.
To scratch an itch. It's nice. And Minecraft sort of gave me a similar thing when I was really into that. But yeah, I like that open natural world feeling. Like the organic natural world in this is, I don't know, you can almost smell it. It's nice.
That's also a learn. There's so much about the texture of that game that I'm like, oh my God, I want to feel that. But then I just think of the actual act of pressing the buttons to do things where I'm like, I probably won't enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah. If the whole making coffee at your campsite mechanic bothered you and me, like it in Red Dead 2, but like bothered you and me, like then yeah, that's not the game for you. Anyway, Drew, what have you been currently consuming?
Well, since all the cool kids are talking about video games, I'll talk about a video game. I am playing Final Fantasy VIII Remastered. Recently, they put out a remastered version of this. This is often considered the bastard child of the PlayStation 1 era of Final Fantasy. It's a game I owned before. I've beaten Final Fantasies 6, 7, 9, 10, and Tactics, which are all, that's kind of, sequentially when they were coming out. 8 was the only one I've ever put down twice in my life when I've attempted to play it. And now that this remaster's out, I was like, I'm going to play this through. I'm going to do this. I want to see. I've never gotten substantially far in this game. And the reason being is the RPG system that they implement in this is so radically different from any other standard JRPG system.
Huh? How so?
Well, first of all, there's leveling up only really matters in boss fights. As far as random encounters, enemies will always be on your same level.
Huh.
So it's not like you can just go to some area and fight a bunch of weak enemies and grind to level up to be able to beat later enemies. Random enemies will always be a challenge to you. So that's an interesting wrinkle. But the deep level of how this thing works is what they call the junction system, where instead of having like an MP counter, which you use to cast magic and then that decreases over time, you have to draw magic out of enemies or draw spots that show up on the map in certain areas, and you stock a number of those magic. So it's like, oh, I'm fighting a goblin and I draw magic and I can get 4 cures from him. So once you stock this magic, you can then basically junction the magic to different stat elements. For example, it's like, oh, I can junction water to my HP and it will increase my HP stats. Or I can junction fire to my elemental attack. So now there will be an added fire element to my physical attack.
This is why I don't play these kinds of games.
Right. Well,
like I'm so lost.
That's the thing. And it's the thing that I think has kept this game from being, and it's so clear that they were like, we clearly went too complicated on this one. Cause in Final Fantasy IX, they stripped it down to bare essentials in terms of how these kind of things work. It's like, yep, we're back to just basic HP and MP, and it's 9 is my favorite out of that era because its entry point is so much easier. Even 7, I think, was complicated. Like, people kind of had to figure out like how the materia system worked and how it was linked to your armor and weapons and all this kind of stuff. So that complication with 8, I think, has always been a problem. And I think there's just, the thing is, when I played it, I was too young to really get how it all worked. And now that I'm older, I'm like, okay, I see how this works. It's tedious. I will admit that it is a tedious element where it's like, okay, I have to make sure that this is done. And oh, did I level up this thing? Because all of this is also linked into your your summon creatures, like you have to junction summon creatures to specific characters. That gives them the ability to junction all this magic. So it just layers itself on top of itself.
I know Eric Fuchs is going to have stuff to say about this, but
I can't
imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm sure he will. But the positive being Final Fantasy VIII's a really gorgeous game. The success of 7 allowed them to really amp up what they were able to do with the character models, with the pre-rendered backgrounds for all the maps and stuff. It's gorgeous. It's prettier than FF7. Like, I will stand by that. And this new remaster that they've done has only bettered it, because now the models look much nicer than they ever did on PS1. It's much easier for me now to get into this particular world, which is what the Final Fantasy games are so much about. It's like, what is this fantasy world that will have things you recognize? Like, yeah, there'll be chocobos and shit like that. But what's different about this? And there's so many things, like the way you earn money is completely different. It's not like, oh, you just get money from beating enemies. It's like, no, you have a rank system that gives you money in certain timed intervals. And if you win more battles, your rank goes up. If you lose battles, your rank goes down. That's the only way you can get money, other than by like selling items at stores. There is a complicated curve, I think, to Final Fantasy VIII, and that's the big thing that prevents it from being something that even the fan base has really gotten into. But seeing that it got a remaster, and I played the remasters of Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy IX, I was like, I need to go through this game. Like, I need to see if I was missing out in the story or the characters. And now seeing the things that it tried to experiment with, maybe they don't totally work, but I like that they were trying to do something really different. And using the success from the previous entry to be like, let's kind of think outside the box with a lot of the things that we just take for granted in this series. So I'm enjoying it, but it's also a game I'm playing in very small increments, where it's like, yeah, maybe I'll play it for an hour at most. And it's like, okay, I'll put it down and come back to it.
Word?
Yeah. Well, because I'm sure, like with something like Death Stranding, you just want to sit there and sink time into a game like that.
Yes.
And for this, it's like, yeah, I'm going to fight a couple random battles. I'm going to advance the story a little bit, fight a boss fight. That's all I need. Like, satisfied. Whereas something like Death Stranding or Metal Gear Solid 5, which I'm still like, maybe I should at least try it. I think it's like $5 now. Like, because that's my test for Death Stranding, is like, if I play Metal Gear Solid 5 and I can get into it at all, I'm like, I have to play Death Stranding. Because I know they're built on the same engine. It's the same. It's like, yeah, now Metal Gear Solid's open world, and it's still Kojima being his Kojima self. So We'll see. Maybe. I'm contemplating that after Final Fantasy VIII. I'm like, if it's still $5 after I finish playing Final Fantasy VIII, it's $5 why not? I'll give it a spin. But let us close things out with our
Comment of the Week.
And the comment of the week this week, you guys, as always, had wonderful discussions, including some a nice little thread about Travis name dropping Power Man 5000, which I loved.
It's my pleasure.
But the comment of the week this week will come from Jetpack Jesus, who says, well, now that you did an episode on Jupiter Ascending and Valerian, I guess I finally have a reason to watch these movies. I'll admit I have been eyeing them on streaming services lately out of curiosity, but you guys finally knocked me off the fence. Which then Jetpack Jesus edited and said, Jupiter Ascending down, Valerian to go, which I must say has a banger of a credit sequence prologue. First of all, yes, we agree with that. And thank you so much. I mean, the fact that you guys would go out of your way to watch these movies for the show is just awesome beyond words.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we love most about Genre Vision. It's become sort of a movie club, and while we don't all get to watch these things in sync with one another, it's close enough that it feels really special. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we want to thank Dani for coming on the show with us. It was, she was having a John Waters week, and I thought, well, if she's watching Polyester and we're watching Polyester, there's no fucking reason not to have her on the episode today. So, Dani, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Anytime I'll come on and talk about any kinds of things, especially John Waters. You know that.
Well, next week we're staying in the suburbs because Where Women Month is starting, and what better place to start than with Ginger Snaps, the Canadian suburban werewolf film.
Yes, we're going to have a theme month in May, in the very scary month of May. Werewoman Month, which they won't all be werewolves. It's just werewomen. So we're going to kick things off with Ginger Snaps. We hope you'll be back next week. Again, Dani, as Travis said, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure having you on.
Always good to be here.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.